It's really a pleasure for me to, because when I met Elena some months ago during my PhD defense, and she asked me whether I could present here in your course, I raised the doubt. Well, I mean, with pleasure, but Italy, of course, is not a post-Soviet context, so I'm quite happy to kick off this round of the extended perspective that you are adopting in your interest. So I will try to share the screen. Okay, can you see it?
Yes, it works.
Okay, perfect. So, regenerating public housing, regenerating cities. It is, or it has been, the title of my PhD research. And I'm gonna communicate to you, or want to give you some insights into what I have learned and what I found were interesting lessons that could also be of interest for a non-Italian audience. So I'm very happy about your curiosity for Italy, which is not a given, so to say. So in this afternoon, I prepared a presentation in three parts, basically. So I'm going to give you a quick overview of the public housing system in Italy, of how it works, and some brief historical insights of the intersections between public housing and urban regeneration. And finally, I chose some lessons, so 10 lessons from the 5 cities that have been the case studies of my research. Yes, if you have any questions for clarification, you're also free to interrupt at any time. You would have to speak up because I cannot see any of your faces anymore. But please feel free to do so at any moment. So, what is it and how did we get there? Some key figures to start with. So there is public housing in Italy is a very minor share of the housing stock, with less than 3%, around 900,000 flats in the country, accommodating around 2.5 million tenants, which are more or less 4% of the Italian population. What is important to know is that public housing is far from enough to cover the existing housing needs. There are around 300,000 households that would be eligible for public housing and are waiting for a flat that they're most likely not receive in the upcoming, let's say, decade, because the turnover in the public housing stock is very, very low. Also, there's an estimated demand that is much higher, that is around 650,000 households. Public housing is a stock where people live that have a very low or even declare having no income at all. So around 40% of public tenants declare to have no income at all. Plus additional criticalities in your life. So if you, for example, are a single parent, if you have health issues and so on, this very much increases the potential of being offered a public flat. Lastly, public housing is quite fragmented because around 22% of the stock have been privatized since the 1990s. But in a very patchy way. So meaning that public housing flats were offered, or a part of the stock was offered to sitting tenants who could opt to buy their flats, meaning that you have buildings that are partly owned still by the public housing provider and partly by private tenants. So the history of public housing is long. So it started in the early 20th century with the foundation of the ICAM, the Municipal Institute for Minimal Dwellings in Trieste, which at this point in time was not an Italian city, but belonged or was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And based on this example, a year later, a law was adopted in Italy that led to a foundation wave of autonomous institutes for public housing throughout the entire country. So those were the starting years. When the fascist regime took over, what they basically did is that they centralized public housing policies and established a two-track system that distinguished between an urban sub-proletariat and regime loyalists with corresponding housing typologies. So housing became, or public housing became, both an instrument of control on the one hand, because what you see here on the picture, for example, was the typical typology for the urban sub-proletariat, very dense, very small dwellings that were surrounded by a gate. So you had to so you had some control over who would enter, who would exit, at what points in time, and so on. Versus housing as an instrument of reward, where regime loyalists would be offered very nice small villas in the outskirts. After the war, well, the main focus was on reconstruction and on the development of new neighborhoods, obviously. And there was quite a famous program, the Piano in a Casa, that was started in 1949, in the course of which over 300,000 dwellings were built in more than 5,000 Italian municipalities. And this was an experience that brought forth a lot of experimentation in architectural terms, a lot of debate on how housing on what housing should provide, and on the relationship between housing and cities and neighborhoods more widely. The 60s and 70s saw more of spreading outwards, so public housing spread outwards into the peripheries, became more large scale. And this occurred in context with so-called piani di zona, so zoning plans dedicated explicitly to the construction of economic and popular housing through public housing providers and cooperatives. Moreover, the GESCAL was established, which was a funding mechanism that worked on the basis of deductions on salaries and so salaries of workers and deductions of employees. The 70s, 80s started to see a shift from new construction to renovation. So the last larger scale housing estates were built in this period. And so this was one of the shifts. Another shift was changes in governance mechanisms, in rent setting mechanisms, and specifically what happened is that a point system was introduced that gave points according to fragilities of tenants. So this was the moment when the fragilization, the welfareization of the public housing system in Italy started. The 90s, not so many good things happened in the 90s. I'm going to start with one good thing that happened. That was the introduction of integrated regeneration programs. So programs that perceived public housing regeneration, or the regeneration of disadvantaged neighborhoods more widely, in a comprehensive sense, trying to tackle not only physical dimensions, but also social, economic, ecological issues, and so on. So that was a positive note to be said on the 1990s. On the other hand, competencies were regionalized, which per se, I would say, is not a bad thing, but it went along with a retreat of the state that abolished more or less responsibility and abolished also structural funds. And to compensate for this, the possibility of public housing alienation was introduced, kickstarting a process of residualization that had multiple consequences. So, well, I don't know if everyone here is familiar with residualization, with the process that is a multidimensional process with implications of one dimension on the other. Exemplified and just to get back to this, triggers a negative downward spiral. So in quantitative terms, so public housing residualization in Italy So yes, underfunding occurred or is quite severe in Italy, which spends around half than the EU average on housing development. This obviously has consequences on the quality of the stock, which deteriorates physically, and there's a renovation backlog linked to the reduction of funds, which is amplified by very low rents, because in public housing in Italy, rents are linked to the income of the tenants and are on average 110 euros a month, to which add rent arrears, so tenants were not able to pay their rents, even though they are so low. There is a growing welfareization, as I already mentioned, because obviously the less dwellings the public housing provider has at the disposal to allocate, the more targeted allocation needs to be, benefiting obviously the most fragile population groups. And so today there's a situation where so the typical public housing tenant in Italy today is either elderly, a long-term tenant, usually a widow, because the husband had died, kids had moved out, and so on, that are increasingly juxtaposed by younger families, larger families that often have a migration or cycle, both work, I would say. There is an increasingly negative public perception and stigmatization that goes along with both the deterioration of the stock and the concentration of a disadvantaged population. So, but public housing is not all the same, and this is so obvious that actually I'm a bit embarrassed to even put it on the slide. But I think it's important to, in a context as that of Italy, where public housing is perceived as a homogeneous mass, to acknowledge there are many differences in terms of qualities, as you can see on this picture, and not only the physical structural quality, but also the architectural, the quality of the architectural design itself. Location, you can see here, this on the left-hand side, it's a public housing estate in Trieste, and this is probably of all those that I visited, the one that with the most unprivileged location next to a highway, which is located next to a factory. While on the other hand, you have, as you can see on the right-hand side, a public housing estate where you are 20 meters in front of the sea. Public housing qualities distinguish also, I mean, that's not a quality per se, but they differentiate also in terms of size and scale, in terms of services, infrastructures, and in the way how they are used or how they are not used, and open and green spaces. So they're very different qualities. And this does have to do quite a lot with urban regeneration, because these the qualities that you saw are resources that can be leveraged upon, while the criticalities are issues that can be tackled through regeneration programs. So yeah, so I asked myself, basically, and people that I've been talking with, whether regeneration interventions can contribute to mitigating the process of residualization that I've just described. So whether public housing can possibly be de-residualized, and whether this downward spiral can be mitigated somehow and can change direction. On the other hand, I was interested in understanding whether public housing can play a more strategic role in the regeneration of Italian cities more widely, given all the features that I described, namely that there is a stock that is aging, deteriorating, residual in quantities, but at the same time has a a certain spatial cohesion, a certain urban imprint, and where a lot of interventions have already taken place that are, however, little valorized and little communicated so far. So when talking about urban regeneration, what you typically find, or one of the dominant, very basic definitions, is interventions that are aimed at improving the physical, social, economic, and environmental conditions in an existing area. So I used this definition, but I was quite generous in its interpretation, because if you are looking for interventions that check all these boxes in Italy, you will not find much. So for my research, I was looking for urban regeneration intervention that go beyond merely physical aspects. So in the Italian context, as in many other European contexts, there were a lot of policies and programs. So a very top-down way of urban regeneration since the 1990s. In the Italian context, the most famous one, or most well-known one, are the contratti di quartiere, so the neighborhood contracts. And right now, in context with EU recovery funds, we see that there is, or there has been, it's about to close in the near future, a window of opportunity linked to these funds. So there have been some new projects and programs that have been started in recent years. However, urban regeneration increasingly also encompasses bottom-up activities and micro-regeneration. So for me, I was interested in both top-down big projects and programs and smaller interventions. What's interesting in the Italian context is that there is the discourse on urban regeneration is quite polarized between. So there are two narratives. On the one hand, areas regarding areas subject to valorization, so the typical brownfield site or railway yards and so on, where the focus is a lot on opportunities, potentials, and so on, also in how these projects are communicated. And on the other hand, where public housing is concerned, or urban peripheries more generally are concerned, the focus is really on mitigating necessities and shortcomings. So this is something that is, I would call a fragility bias that exists both in public housing research and in media representation. When looking at the actual linkages between public housing and urban regeneration, because this is the question that I was asked many times, and I think it has to do with this polarized discourse, with this fact that public housing is perceived mostly in negative terms. So the question was, okay, but what does public housing have to do with urban regeneration? Why is it relevant? So to answer to this question, I would say it is both a nexus of scale. So as said, public housing typically comes not in diffuse buildings, but in the form of at times very big neighborhoods. And there is indeed a strong correlation between public housing and both social marginalization and structural deterioration. Secondly, there is a legal nexus. So when looking at public housing legislation, there is often, because there are regional laws, there is often explicit reference to public housing providers as those who can engage in complex projects, in innovative and experimental projects. And lastly, and this brings me to the last section of the presentation, there is an operational nexus. So over the years, over the decades, public housing providers have made a lot of experiences and have done many things in terms of public housing regeneration. So there is an existing inventory of experiences. Now getting to the 10 lessons from the 5 cities. So those are examples from projects of the 5 cities that I've been working on. So these are the 5 cities I've been working on. I try to cover a bit the whole peninsula, starting from Trieste over to Bologna, Firenze, Bari, and Catania. So to cover a bit both north, south, and center. And so I chose 2 lessons from each city, from one project each. So lesson number 1, urban regeneration doesn't necessarily require major physical transformations to generate strong impacts on a territory. Lesson number 2, public housing neighborhoods can be important platforms to support aging in place and promote elderly autonomy. So to give you some context, well, the project from which these lessons quite clearly emerge is called the micro areas, so the micro areas. And it's a project that has been launched already more than 20 years ago. So the first micro area was launched in 1998. These are points of reference in public housing neighborhoods. So in the ground floor of public housing estates, the public housing provider provides a one flat, one dwelling that is used by, firstly, a nurse that is there to support the elderly with health issues. So also very practical things, measuring blood pressure, handing out vaccines, and so on. There's also one person from the Public Housing Association who supports with bureaucratic issues, and a person from the municipality who supports also with bureaucracy and other things. And this is quite relevant in context of that of Trieste, as it is one of the most overaged cities in Italy, and this is even more relevant in terms of public housing, where 34% the tenants are older than 65, and almost 50% are single households. Today, so the project has been particularly successful because it has been amplified. So today there are 60 micro areas that cover a catchment area of around 18,000 people, which is approximately 10% of the city's population. And what renders this successful is, first of all, the proximity. So these are really, this is really a service in the middle of neighborhoods. Continuity, so the fact that it has been ongoing and has been growing over the past more than 20 years, and the capillary presence, so its diffusion in the entire city. What is moreover quite interesting is that the cost benefit ratio is by employing little cost, an outcome is produced that has proven to be quite significant. So moving on to Bologna, lesson number 3 would be public housing regeneration can be a touchstone for climate change mitigation. And participation goes a long way, but its transformative potential remains constrained by regulatory frameworks. So here, the example or the project that provided these lessons is the Parco della Resilienza, so the Resilience Park that has been recently finished, I think 1 or 2 years ago. And the project foresaw, first of all, the energy retrofitting of the estate, an estate from the 1930s, which you already saw on a previous picture, by the way, and the transformation of the green spaces adjacent to the estate into a public park. And this was interesting because, first of all, the idea was to establish new connections between the city center, because this estate is quite close to the city center, and an area further north, which is subject to a wider transformation process. and by establishing this park, this point of interest, to reduce the stigma linked to this estate specifically. At the same time, it was interesting from the point of view of managing costs, because due to the fact that a semi-private space was handed over to the management of the city, costs were also transferred to the city, and both managing costs for the public housing association, but also for the tenants, were reduced. And the interesting thing here is that, or another interesting, I think, overall interesting project, but another interesting thing is that this was not this project was not funded through funds for public housing regeneration, but for funds for climate change mitigation, and this is not so usual in the Italian context. There has been a participatory process, and this is something where Bologna is really an interesting context, because they have a very sophisticated and, well, I would say, formalized, standardized process of, procedures of participation. However, they encountered the issue that I've been briefly touching upon earlier of the mixed condominiums, where you have multiple owners in one and the same building, which resulted in the situation that one of these 9 buildings was left out of the intervention, because public funds could not be used for this building due to regulations and laws. What happened then is that tenants obviously felt left out, and an architects collective tried to mitigate this situation by engaging specifically kids from this block in another co-design process, which was called block by block. I don't know if anyone is familiar with it, but it's actually a very nice initiative sponsored by Microsoft, where co-design is happening through Minecraft with kids. So, Florence, here I chose the following lessons. Transforming public non-residential assets can unlock opportunities for increasing public housing and reframing its meaning. And secondly, public housing is compatible with historic centers and non-residential functions. The example I chose here is Le Murate. It's a very interesting project that is very little known, interestingly, because I think it's really a very innovative example, where a listed building from the 15th century that was built as a monastery, as a convent. Well, yeah, something like a monastery. And then used as a prison for around 450 years in the very heart of the city of Firenze. So this was transformed into public housing in the middle of the city center, to which were added cultural, commercial uses, arts uses, office uses, and so on. What was interesting here is that the municipality, when they started the process in 1995, was really driving. So they really wanted this project. And interestingly, even though city governments changed and changed and changed, everybody stuck to it. And today it's really a nice example of a transformation, a very rare example of transformation where public housing is being brought back into the center. So it's interesting from this point of view, bringing back low-income groups to the center, because this is the neighborhood of Santa Croce, which was typically a working class neighborhood. Bye, thank you. Sorry, maybe I should not read while talking. And it's also interesting, and you can see here the opening, the gateway through this structure. This is a part of the city that is quite a large part of the city, actually, that has been closed off for a period of 500 years and been opened up and given back to the citizens for appropriation and use. So we're moving further south to Bari. Here, two lessons, or my two lessons of choice, would be that culture can be a means or an instrument, one among many, of regeneration in public housing, even in the most difficult environments. And social regeneration requires continuity, trust, and an understanding of local power dynamics, including informal ones. So here, this is the Accademia del Cinema Ragazzi, which is, well, a social association that has been established in this neighborhood, San Pio, which is not only heavily stigmatized, peripheral, and problematic from many points of view, including the fact that organized crime is not just present in this neighborhood, but is acting like a like a second government in this area. So it's a very, very difficult environment. And here, this social cooperation or social cooperative has been established in 2005 to mitigate the situation, in particular addressing youth, but not only. So what they're doing is that they try to use culture to do the social. And so they provide formation in terms of courses in cinema making, photography, and so on. And recently, so a year ago or so, they opened a social brewery that is managed by a group of youth from the neighborhood. So here, what's interesting or what's important to, or one lesson that that has been very prominent is, first of all, as I said already, continuity is crucial, not just in terms of funding, because they have been established in the beginning for a period of 1 year, and from year to year, they have to reapply for funds and so on. So it's a very precarious situation that, however, has become to some degree institutionalized and is accepted in the neighborhood. And this is key because it's not easy in such environments to establish relations, not just with the population, but also with, with or in respect of these informal power dynamics that are in place in these neighborhoods. So lastly, Catania. So, ninth lesson for this afternoon. Civil disobedience can spark regeneration, but external backing is key in stabilizing its outcomes. And grassroots initiatives can mitigate public absence or failure, but they cannot fully replace institutional support. Here we are in Librino. Librino is one of the biggest European public, not only public, there is also cooperative housing, but it's mostly public housing neighborhood in Catania with a population that is actually not so well known because it hasn't been censored lately, and it's not really possible to censor it because there are several practices of squatting, of informal uses, and so on. And also here, there is the issue of organized crime, but also a very important issue of political neglect, political overwhelm. So the city of Catania has been without a government for the past 5 years or so. So there are many, many issues that need to be considered. The positive example here, because I tried to choose, I mean, there are also a lot of negative lessons that I learned and things that haven't gone so well, but I chose here to bring you some examples from the positive side, which is in some contexts that are very, very difficult, such as this one, not so easy. So here, Librino, there was, or there still is, a rugby association that is called the Briganti. So the, how would you translate Briganti? robbers, or in German it's Banditen. So the Briganti di Librino, which have emerged from an act of civil disobedience. So they squatted this sports field that you see here and self-managed it. They then received some unexpected support by Renzo Piano, who gave legitimacy, visibility, and leverage to this group, to their actions, and managed meanwhile to not Renzo Piano, the group managed to have an agreement with the municipality. So now it is institutionalized, and they deliver services also in the name of the municipality, activities for youth, specifically regarding sports, but also different other activities. So last reflections. Very last reflections. To answer to the initial question on de-residualization, I would say it is possible. Yes, it is possible also with small steps to some degree, of course, and can be promoted by various actors. But the important question is, how can these good practices and these experiences be valorized, be upscaled, be communicated, and so on? Secondly, alliances are key. So the public actor obviously is at the center, is important, but other actors need to be included also. Quantitative de-residualization, so an increase in the number of public housing is absolutely rare in the Italian context. So from the examples that I showed you, the only thing that led to an increase of the number of units was Le Murate in Florence. And yeah, as I said, it's a very rare instance. But of course, if you remember the huge mismatch between the number of people who are waiting for a public flat and the number of flats that are available, that are almost none, it's clear that there is a problem. And of course, when we think about public housing, we should discuss in a strategic way what the perspective is for the sector in the future in Italy. And this is something that does not really happen. Leading to the last point, namely, quite obviously, that political commitment is indispensable, just as funding and a strategic vision on these issues. So that was it from my side. Thank you for your attention.